Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here at First Congregational Church. I'm Dave Huddleston with WSB TV. We want to take a moment this afternoon to recognize and honor law enforcement, community leaders, and civic leaders who have given of their time to make our community and our country a better place. We thought today we would dialogue, if you will, talk about what we can do to bridge the gaps between our various communities and make our community a better place. And what better way to do that than to talk to one another, to listen to one another, and to get to know one another. So that's what we're going to do today. The purpose of this meeting, if you will, is to see if we can bridge some of those gaps. How can civic service and law enforcement organizations better serve the community? How do we create a more peaceful and respectful relationship? So to do that, we have some people who are very good at their jobs and very good at building bridges. Let's introduce some of them to you. We're going to start with the host of this beautiful space, Reverend Dr. Dwight Andrews, Senior Pastor at First Congregational Church. Doctor, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm Dwight Andrews, pastor of First Congregational Church. I have been the senior minister here for 30 years, and I'm also a professor of music at Emory University, and we're delighted to have all of you here with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Andrews. Next up, Deputy Chief Timothy Peake with the Atlanta Police Department. Chief?
Good afternoon. Again, Deputy Chief Timothy Peake, Atlanta Police Department, a 29-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department, and also a native of Atlanta. So just really and truly look forward to having this conversation and really and truly bridging the gap and closing the gap altogether with community. And Pastor, we thank you so much for hosting us here. Thank you.
Next up, AUSA Mary Webb, Deputy Chief of the Violent Crimes and National Security Section of the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Northern District of Georgia. Ms. Webb?
Good afternoon. Mary Webb with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'm an Assistant United States Attorney, so I'm a federal prosecutor for the office that covers the Northern District of Georgia. I'm also the Project Safe Neighborhoods Coordinator, which is our program for trying to reduce violence and engage in community outreach, prevention, and intervention in this district. And it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Ms. Webb. Benjamin Gibbons, Special Agent in Charge, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Mr. Gibbons?
Good afternoon. Once again, thank you, Reverend Andrews, for the invitation to this event. I'm the Special Agent in Charge of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. But first off, I would like to say my I started here at Morris Brown College, is where I graduated from, and became very familiar with the Atlanta community. Was engaged with a lot of community actions while I was in college. The ability to start with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms as an agent and rise to a special agent in charge. I think that building blocks with our community and partners and civic folks is highly important for that kind of engagement from the federal level as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. C.J. Stewart, community advocate, Atlanta native, and former Chicago Cubs outfielder, and an Amazon #1 best-selling author, Living to Lead, a story of passion, purpose, and grit. And what a fine, fine program he has for young men. Mr. Stewart.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Like you said, I'm a Grady baby, born and raised here in Atlanta, and baseball was my ticket out of poverty. And I'm the Chief Visionary Officer for LEAD, Center for Youth, which stands for Launch, Expose, Advise, Direct. And our mission is to empower a disenfranchised generation to lead and transform their city by using the sport of baseball to help them overcome 3 curveballs that threaten their success, which is crime, poverty, and racism.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Let's dive into this, shall we? Our first question for this panel, and we will rotate out throughout the afternoon, dispelling myths and misconceptions. How do we rebuild trust between service organizations and the community? How do we rebuild trust between service organizations and the community? Dr. Andrews, I'll start with you.
Thank you. One of the things that I think is most important in this conversation is the idea that trust is built on relationships, and we've already heard that word before. And in some ways, we've come to a moment in our collective history where our experiences and our knowledge of one another is really based oftentimes on not having a relationship with active police officers, and that usually for many of our folks, when we encounter law enforcement, it's in a negative situation. And because we haven't built a relationship in advance of that, there's already a kind of polarization in terms of our encounter. So one of the things I think that churches and all civic organizations can do is to really foster building relationships early on with children. Children shouldn't have their first encounter with police when they get into trouble. It should begin much before that. And in a sense, I think if we were more actively engaged in building relationships with all of those here, I think that in some ways, when difficulties do arise, it's not the first encounter. And I think that makes all the difference in the world. Police officers were my heroes in my neighborhood and when I was growing up. And admittedly, that was many, many years ago. But the opportunity for admiring police officers was because we knew them. They were our coaches. They helped us with on the playground. They were our neighbors. And so we sensed connectivity even before we were of age. And I think that that's a key point, and I do think that churches have not been as aggressive as we should be in making opportunities for encounters, conversations. Law enforcement is a great career, and we don't see it as that because we haven't been exposed. So my hope is that we can figure out ways to build bridges and encounters with one another that would literally be the basis for that new trust and relationship.
Mr. Stewart, I want to come to you with that same question. How do we rebuild trust between service organizations and community? Because you interact very closely with the community.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much, but I'm gonna definitely be brief. But for us, we build trust by making and keeping promises, and making guarantees. So something as simple as, for us, we're gonna be here in your school, in your community, 3 times a week, 5 days a week. And being able to deliver on that. So whenever promises aren't made and promises aren't kept, I think it's very difficult to build trust. Also, too, words matter, and I'm just glad we have this opportunity to have the dialogue, but it also, making sure that when we do it, it's a brave space. So that, especially as we deal with youth, sometimes they challenge my leadership and point out some of my flaws, but I gotta make sure I create a space so that they can do that. But then I also hold them accountable for helping me in those things where I may lack. And then also, even as we talk about myths, but also dealing with facts. There's a real reason why there's a distrust when it comes down between youth and law enforcement. I happen to have great relationship with law enforcement because one of my coaches was a Atlanta Police Department officer. But there are a lot of people that haven't had those experiences. So just in closing, I feel like for us, the best way to develop trust is to make promises and keep promises.
Chief, I'll turn to you now. Then, what can we do to build that trust between service organizations and the community?
So I think that we have to be intentional, and I certainly agree with CJ's assessment. There are things that's happening, and we really and truly have to be accountable to our words, not just the words, but the actions. But we have to be intentional in how we forge relationships and how we start them, and really and truly at an early age. I'll give just a short example, and I've had oftentimes the opportunities to be in a precinct, and a parent will bring in a child, and they will tell the child, if you do wrong, he's going to get you. And I think that they should do the exact opposite, because that automatically puts that child into the fear of that police officer to believe that, we're after them. And that's just not the case. So when they do that, I often just tell the parent, no, we'll love them, but we are not going to do anything. And we need for people just to be intentional about how those interactions take place. We want everything to be as positive as it is. And as Pastor mentioned, those early occurrences generally are when something's bad going on, and You only have one time to make that first impression. So we want to change that first impression and start those relationships early on and let them build from there so that there's a level of trust that starts at an early age.
Special Agent in charge, Gibbons, you are one of those law enforcement agencies that people don't see as often as they would Chief Peak here. What can we do to bridge that gap?
So part of bridging that gap is us being engaged with our state and local partners where we're at. Just for example, I have probably 160 employees. Only 80 of those are special agents for the whole state of Georgia. So it's key that we're working with our partners on a daily basis. And like Pastor said, engagement from the beginning, not when it's a bad event, being out on those positive events, creating those positive connections with the community, I think from the beginning. And so for federal, we try to make sure that we're engaged with our state and local partners from the beginning.
And Ms. Webb, not only Deputy Chief Webb, Project Safe Neighborhoods and coordinator, you too are in the communities and kind of can see or know what some of the things that we need to do to build that trust between service organizations and the community.
That's right, and one thing I'll do is echo what my co-panelists have said and say that a lot of it is about time. It's about starting before you're in the middle of a crisis so that the relationships are already there before a crisis happens, making yourself available for that time. And then when we're having those conversations on the law enforcement side, something that's very important is for us to listen to our community partners. And by putting in the time and listening and having these conversations, you can begin to build the trust so that people feel comfortable talking and actually sharing and telling you what they see, what they're experiencing, where their needs are, so that as law enforcement, you're able to respond to the needs in the community. And exactly as SAC Gibbons was saying, we really do that by working closely as well with our state and local partners who are absolutely crucial and often have those relationships and that time experience.
Here's a question just for the panel itself. One thing that struck me with this question, it says, how do we rebuild trust between service organizations and the community? When did we lose that trust? And how do we get back to before we lost it?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm not sure when things began to turn southward. I think it's been a very, very long progression. But I can recount, even in my own life, that my admiration for the police changed when I became an adolescent in Detroit, because oftentimes I had an experience where I was stopped for no reason. And my bad encounters started to frame and actually change my feelings about the police. And that experience continued through college. And through my young professional life, when police officers would say, excuse me, sir, where's your ID? And I was a young professor, and I was a young professor on a majority campus. And so the idea of a young black guy on a university campus early in the morning was suspicious. And so those kinds of encounters really started to jade my sense of trust. Because I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was not what the officer expected because I was a black guy out of place. And so I don't know that it was that one officer, or maybe there's been a progression in which our lack of trust of one another, which I do think is a part of this conversation. There's a general cynicism and mistrust of others that I think is part of a much larger problem. But for me, that's when it started to change. So the 1960s, if you think about the civil unrest, the changing relationships where police were really policing neighborhoods, that started a change, I think, in my relationship with police, because I saw police in a different way after the urban unrest in cities like Detroit and Gary, Chicago. So for me, that was my own experience, and I don't know how endemic it is for everyone else.
Origin stories matter, and I think that's very, very important. And so when I started thinking about rebuilding something, you can't rebuild something without starting with the origin of it. And so recently, Tanya Austin, who works with the Atlanta Police Department, she came and she spoke to my Rotary Club, and she was telling us about a book called Keeping the Peace by Herbert Jenkins, and he was a former police chief of the Atlanta Police Department, and really led the police department. I believe it was when the first eight African Americans came into the police department. But right here on page 4, I mean, in the beginning of the book, I mean, he talks about how the Ku Klux Klan was embedded in the Atlanta Police Department. And so I know that isn't the case now, but when it was happening, there are moments that turned into trauma that has passed down through generations of families, and that trauma has not, if it's not dealt with, it can continue on, and then all of a sudden it can become myths and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, in order to, and I don't even know if rebuild is the right word, but origin stories matter. I mean, we got to start with some of the facts and create these brave spaces for people to say, here's why I don't like law enforcement, and for law enforcement to even also express their concerns. And I'll say lastly, my wife, she's afraid every time I do a police ride along. And I absolutely love it because I love seeing the amazing work that the police officers do here in Atlanta Police Department. It's hard work, and it's very, very stressful, but it's important for us to just live in each other's shoes to find that out.
Chief?
So what I'll say again, and I think probably intentionality would probably be another word that I look at, because as we look at the origin of what was happening in the 60s, and so we can't just black it out and act like it didn't happen, but what we can do on the front end is to ensure that as we bring on new officers day to day, that we ensure that they get the proper training, that we ensure that they get the adequate supervision, which is why one of the things that we do is that when we hire an officer now, they're required to go through training where we take them to the Center for Civil and Human Rights so that they can understand where people are and why people respond in the manners that they do. If you can understand it, then perhaps we could change and you'll be mindful of what happened. So now if someone is responding in a certain way, you can change it. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I say as we talk about rebuilding the relationships, and it's gonna require a moment for us all to be vulnerable. We have to open up and deal with our young people, open our hearts and be vulnerable and bring them in. Likewise, we have to figure out that way of coaching through the PAL program, through the At Promise Centers, to get them and get them into a manner to where they can open up and receive us as well. And so if we can establish a relationship with one or two, then they will be that advocate that could go back and bring 2 or 3 in. And so ultimately we're starting to build upon a foundation that will help us move forward for the future, but we have to do it, and we have to be intentional.
You said, Chief, a couple of things that struck a chord with me. The At Promise Center, I think that place is phenomenal, and the work that they do to help change those myths or those, you know, that mistrust between police and the community. The Police Athletic League, the PAL League that you just mentioned, I think is another way to help, again, foster that relationship once again. I remember when I was young, police officers would pass out baseball cards. You know, they weren't anything as good as Mr. Stewart over there, but you know, they passed out, and so you saw police officers in a different light. And another thing that I think is fantastic that the Atlanta Police Department does is the horse patrol. I was over on northwest Atlanta the other day, and the horse patrol was out going into the bluff. And it wasn't for patrols, from what I understand. They were just going into the community and being visible instead of when there's an incident, when there's a crowd control issue, then we see the horse patrol. No, they were just going out into the community. And I think it's things like that that can help rebuild that trust.
Absolutely, absolutely. I totally agree. When we're out there, the horses, it's a conversation piece to get you away from what that uniform is sitting on. They're interested in the horse, and so we like that. And so what we got to do is we got to figure out ways to where we can reach people and change the narrative of what's happening. We are all human beings, and we come into this world the exact same way. And so it's our avenues of where we actually have those opportunities to walk down different avenues that sometimes change our thought processes. but we have to realize the humanity in each and every person, regardless to what's going on. We're not against people whatsoever. Unfortunately, as an oath, we are against crime, but we also understand why certain crimes take place. So the goal is to build up people, which is why we have the pre-arrest diversion, now policing alternative diversion, so that when we see problems that are plaguing specific people and specific neighborhoods, that we bring resources in on the front end to try to build the individual up. And if we can fix them, then we can stop the recidivism and having folks having to rely upon crime to survive in the world. We just got to build each other up.
Absolutely. Mr. Stewart, I'm going to start this next question with you. Again, a community advocate and a phenomenal program that you share with your wife, the baseball program to get the young men going. We've done a story, of course, on your program, and I think it's phenomenal. But it kind of deals, again, with the community and looking at the community into policing. And the question is, what myths are most harmful when it comes to foster understanding between the community and service organizations, and why? The question one more time if you need. What myths are most harmful when it comes to foster understanding between the community and service organizations, and why?
So even as you're asking the question, I'm just thinking about my baseball days. You always got to be ready for the fastball, curveball, slider, whatever. So you just got to be ready. And I do appreciate that question. So first of all, when I think about myths, myths can be things that are in the process of being proven as a fact or false. But you can also have myths where you don't even have to take that time because you want to try to benefit from them. I mean, and myths can be very damaging. And so I talked to several of the boys in our program and some of their family, and the obvious ones is that there's a myth that all officers are bad. Yeah. And out to get black people in specifically. And then there's a myth that all black people are bad as well too. But one of the things that my wife Kelly and I, we were talking about that she brought out is there's a myth that black people we can't solve our own problems. Oftentimes, especially here in this city, when we start doing philanthropy, a lot of times, even for us, because black-led nonprofits are the lowest supported financially in the country. So we've even wrestled, as the work that we've been doing for over 15 years, with amazing impact stats, specifically scouting out black boys that are underperforming in grades, attendance, and behavior from Atlanta Public Schools. We've contemplated trying to hire somebody that is white to go out to help us raise the funds. Also contemplating hiring somebody white to make sure that what is being said can be quickly and easily understood by our boys. Because even for me, when I grew up in Atlanta, I thought that white was right, winning was everything, and hope was enough. And so being a black boy in this city, information is important, but knowledge is power. More is powerful. And information plus experience equals knowledge. So it's very important that the people that are coming in that are serving the boys really understand where they're coming from. I'm from Atlanta, and I'm from Zone 1. And so I really understand, but lastly, I'm convicted, I care, and I'm competent. We're never gonna solve problems with black boys that are committing crimes in this city when we have people that aren't convicted, that don't care, and that aren't competent. And the last thing is you can't have fun without funding. You can't even run an effective police department or law enforcement without proper funding. Having sports-based youth development is atrocious in the city. I mean, we don't have the funding that we need to be able to do it, and we're talking about in the millions of dollars as opposed to pay to play. So you have a lot of kids right now in the city that cannot afford to play, cannot afford to move.
Powerful stuff. I started to throw you another fastball, but I said, no, I'm going to spit it out a little bit. Special Agent in Charge, Gibbons, what myths are most harmful when it comes to fostering understanding between the community and service organizations, and why?
Well, like stated, funding, but I'll go with, for us, ATF, there's always the myth of the big federal agency, and specifically in that AUSA Webb knows us. We may just come in and occupy an area. Due to just some initiative out of headquarters, what have you, and then we're gone. And there's no trust capacity for, well, why did you bring in the federal agency to begin with? It's never been explained to that community that, hey, there's here specifically to target those violent offenders within the community. So us just showing up unannounced, not necessarily unannounced, but not brought into those community meetings. This is why we're here. This is why we're working with our state and local partners, is to identify those people that are causing disruption. So the myth becomes that we're the jackbooted thugs. We're here just to kick in everybody's door, arrest everybody, put them on federal charges, when that's not the case. We work well with our state and locals, our federal United States Attorney's Office, to specifically target individuals. But the myth is always, if we are not ahead of it, is we're just targeting black communities.
Because you do come in and out like that, does that make it more difficult for you to make those connections?
Correct, and that's what I'm saying. That's why, being part, working, engaging in this aspect on community service, on these type of panels, going into community meetings, working with our zone sergeants, us being there not when it's the arrest day, the takedown day. It's really at those community events that are just block parties, National Night Out. Those events showing our face, not from a actual enforcement activity, but from a community activity.
Deputy Chief Webb, and also Project Safe Neighborhoods Coordinator, you're, again, in the community. What are those myths that do more harm, and why?
So, speaking from the perspective, more from a prosecutor, some of the myths I see that can go towards prosecutors and as well as towards law enforcement are the myths about what drives us. Why are we doing what we're doing? Is it because of, some sort of bad motivation? I think that myth can be there, and the reality of what I experience, what I see in my colleagues, what I see in our federal law enforcement partners and our state and local partners is overwhelmingly that people are mission driven, that there is a true call to serve the public, a desire to see justice and uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And sometimes it's hard because there's not that time to have those conversations. Why are we here? What drives us? What motivates us? And it's interesting because we are all human, and I do believe there's often more that could bring us together, that when we work with our community partners, we're talking about mission-driven people. And on the law enforcement side, you are dealing with mission-driven people who get up every day and say, I want to make this a better place to live and be. And I think people sometimes don't realize that and don't see that as the driving purpose, and that's probably a very harmful myth, because when you think somebody has good intentions, maybe you give them that little bit of a benefit of a doubt, and you make yourself more open to thinking about, why are they here? What are they trying to accomplish? Are they really here because they believe in me, believe in my community, and want us to have the best life possible? And that's what I see with that real mission-driven sense of purpose in law enforcement.
Pastor and Chief Peak, I'm going to change the question up a little bit on you, because what I'm hearing a little bit from Ms. Webb is maybe there's a situation where people don't understand the process. They don't understand that part of the law enforcement judicial system is that they work together sometimes, they work in tangent sometimes, so everyone, but because you're communicating together, you're all bad people. Law enforcement, the judge, the defense attorney, the prosecutor, all of you are out to get me. Is cynicism one of those things that can undermine working together in the community, not understanding the process?
Well, I certainly think that's the case. But I want to take a step back for a second,
Okay.
because I want to go to the myth part
Sure,
of it.
yes, sir.
Because in some ways I see that there are multiple myths that play out at the same time. The myths about young black boys, for example, as being dangerous, or young black women as being kind of loose or immoral. Many of these myths are much larger than the conversation that we're having here. It's a part of the history of America. That is, our images and understandings of one another around race and racially were formed from the very beginnings of Africans coming to this country as enslaved people. So when we think about a part of our culture like minstrelsy, in which many of the myths and the stereotypes were formed, and they were formed as part of a popular entertainment, that black men were hypersexualized, that old black men were lazy and slovenly, all of these kinds of things are much larger myths that were a part of American culture. And they also became a part of the commodification of these racial myths. So that when we look at popular entertainment today, we have to understand how powerful it is, one, and how many myths are put forward in our understandings of who we are one to another. And I think those myths carry on in terms of who the police are. If you watch any of these violent movies about what the police do and how they do it, this is another collection of myths. So I wanted to say that the cynicism comes in when we lose trust in what the truth is. And because so many of us now see the truth through popular culture, I think that that creates a part of our much larger problem. And one of the things I think that I'm hoping that we will do as a church and as a community is to reconstruct kind of the way in which we understand one another based on encounters, not based on what we see on TV or what we understand through the popular media. And I think if there's anything to be cynical about, quite frankly, I think it's worthwhile to be cynical about what popular culture teaches us and tells us. Many people distrust the news because we're not sure whose story we're getting. And there are different news networks with different facts. And all of this kind of builds in a sense of distrust. So I think that we can do some very important things on the local level, but I think that the acknowledgement that this is a part of a much larger universe of our misunderstanding of one another is an important part of the work that we have to do going forward.
Pastor, I'm just going to challenge you a little bit on and what you said about the historical context of America is spot on. We cannot dispute how we African American people were seen on the majority culture for decades, centuries. Looking at Atlanta, Atlanta is Black Mecca. There is a lot going on in Atlanta, and Atlanta is pretty much run by black people. So my question is, I hear what you're saying about the historical context, but we've got so much going on here in Atlanta that has nothing to do with what happened centuries ago. We've got black musicians, we've got a black mayor, we've got a black police chief, we've got on and on and on, and we're still having these myths that Deputy Chief Peake is out to get me.
That's why it's a myth. The wealthy in Atlanta, which has been a part of the success of Atlanta since the turn of the century, when this church was built, the site of Negro progress. We have affluent black people. Mr. Herndon was a member of this church. But that's also a part of the myth. The average person, black person, living in public housing is not representative of the Atlanta wealthy elite. And that's another part of the same story. This idea of a black Mecca is only partially true. That's how myths get started. It tells one part of the story, but it doesn't tell the whole story. I mean, we do have Tyler Perry, but there's so many people who are not Tyler Perry that are not living that life. And so it's not to undercut the success that's going on in Atlanta. That's why it's been such a very special city for a century. But it's also to acknowledge that there's the underside that we have to deal with if we want to change this equation. Public education, public access, economic parity. There are just so many, even the legal system. As a pastor, I've dealt with trying to get one of my children out of the legal system once they have a bad encounter. And I can tell you that if you're black and poor, even in Atlanta, you have a hard road to hoe. And so I'm hoping that the conversation can help us all to understand better all of the gears that are turning, some of which are much larger than our local community, but they all affect us. So I'm so happy to be a part of the Atlanta Mecca, but I don't want that to overshadow kind of the rest of the story. You know, when Barack Obama got elected a black president, they said, "Oh, well, we're done. We got Oprah, we got Barack Obama.
Everything's going to change."
We've arrived, right? And then we heard that word post-racial, right? We're now in a post-racial moment. Well, that's to deny the reality of the average black experience. And so I'm glad we're sparring about this because I think it's important. I celebrate what we're doing even today, but it's to allow us to see that this is a part of the spade work that we've got to do together.
One of the sad statistics too, Pastor, is you're probably aware, if you're born black and poor in Atlanta, the high chance that you're going to remain poor in Atlanta. And I think that's one of the things that you're getting at and one of the things that needs to change. Chief Peak, the question again, what myths are most harmful when it comes to fostering understanding between the community and service organizations, and why?
So I would have to reach back and certainly agree with CJ's statement to the fact that when we begin to build generalities of who people are and we put them in a category simply because of either what their profession is or what their race is, that really and truly hurts us to the core because it automatically creates a bias. Just a short story, and be honest with you, as admirable as I am of wearing this uniform for the Atlanta Police Department, there was a time, and it really wasn't, but probably about 10, 15 years ago, that I would even open up to my neighbors to allow them to know what I did for a living. They knew me as Tim in my plain clothes, but the minute they were able to see that I was actually Tim, the law enforcement officer, there was a couple that looked a little different, but thankfully we've been able to bridge those gaps. We have to think about, again, those first impressions. I've heard this statement so many times when we talk about the myths and what's happening, and quite frankly, some of it, as we look at it, is perception, and perception is reality to some. I believe it takes, for every one bad incident, it takes 10 good to overcome it, is a statement that I often hear. And so when we deal with myths, they really and truly, that specific one breaks us down so much. And so what I am thankful for is when we talk about, I know there was a question about ATF and whether they're here, is when we look at having task force officers to assist and help in situations like such, that bridges the gap and keeps them into the community because you have an extra layer. One of the things that I really and truly look forward to, and I really want to have those relationships, is with our houses of faith, because the narrative is there. And the opportunity is there. If we just work closer with our partnerships, people get to see who we are. This morning I came, and I never do this, but because I was coming here, I had to go to my church first because I had something to do. Well, this is the first time probably that I have done devotion in my uniform. Because I'm no longer ashamed of who I am, because people have to get to know who we are, and we just have to, again, open up our hearts so that we receive people and look beyond that surface. I never try to judge a book by its cover anymore, but the myth that all are this way or all that way, all black people aren't criminals, all white people aren't bad, all police officers aren't bad. If we go down that road, that's so detrimental, but I see it happening, and we have to change that narrative and stop it when we hear it happen.
Do you, Chief, find yourself that you have to act a different way when you have your uniform on in public?
Well, I believe that character is who you are when no one's looking. Mm-hmm. So I have to act my best when my uniform is on. I have to act my best when it's off, because guess what? There are people out there who know my face. And when I go places, and if I'm doing something that's out of the ordinary or that's quite wrong, that's tarnishing my badge. That's tarnishing my name. That's tarnishing my family's name. And so I have to ensure that I do my best to be on my best behavior at all times. We have bad days, but we have to check it and understand where we are and who we are. And since we're in the church, whose we are, so that we can do the best we can.
It's one of those things that you learned early in church, is that when you're a Christian all the time, because people are looking at you, and the devil's looking at ways to say, see, I told you he wasn't no good. See? And it's probably a similar situation that you probably encountered, Chief.
Amen. Nobody's perfect, but
No one's
we have
perfect.
to be able to try to put our best foot forward.
Let's give a hand to our first round of panelists. We thank you all very much for your time. As you exit this way to the left, our second group of panelists will come up and discuss some more today about bridging those gaps and building a better community. Deputy Chief Prenzina Spann with the Atlanta Police Department. Captain April Moore with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. And Deputy Director Chris Harvey with the Georgia Post. We thank you very much for coming this afternoon and sharing some time with us. We want to talk a little bit about training for the job, training for law enforcement. What goes into becoming a police officer or a special agent or a sheriff's deputy? Because it's one of those things that people think they may know, but may not really know. Again, getting back to what we were asking the first panel, that the police and the prosecutor and the defense attorney and the judge all work in collusion to keep me behind bars. Well, that doesn't necessarily work that way. So what we want to do is start to learn a little bit more about our panel. Let's start with Deputy Chief Prenzina Spann with the Atlanta Police Department.
Good afternoon. So I am Deputy Chief Prenzina Spann. I have 21 years experience on the Atlanta Police Department, and it's good to be here to have this discussion.
Captain April Moore with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. I am Captain April Moore, and I am with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. I have 17 years. Let's try, that is better. We'll start over. Greetings and salutations, everyone. I'm Captain April Moore with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. I have 17 years of law enforcement experience. I actually started off as a 911 operator and went over to the Marshal's Office, and now I am the Community Engagement Commander at the Fulton County Sheriff's Office.
Thank you, Captain. And of course, Deputy Director Chris Harvey with Post.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Chris Harvey. I'm the Deputy Executive Director with the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, POST. I have to clarify that because most people think I bring them the mail, and that's, or that I'm a postal inspector or something like that. But POST is actually the agency in the state of Georgia that certifies every peace officer, about 60,000. That's every correction officer, sheriff deputy, police officer, GBI agent, state trooper, Department of Juvenile Justice, all that stuff. So it's POST's job to set a standard, to enforce that standard, to penalize people if they violate that standard. My own history, I spent most of my life in DeKalb County. I grew up in DeKalb County, was a DeKalb County police officer starting in 1994, and have worked with some district attorney's offices, Secretary of State's office. For the last 6 years, I had the maybe unenviable role as the state director of elections in Georgia. So I've been through some interesting times and talking about bridging gaps and working with different groups. But I'm very happy to be at Post and happy to be with this crowd today.
Thank you, sir, and we thank you all very much for being with us. Executive Director Harvey, we're going to have you answer the first question if we could, and then of course the others as well. Part of serving the community the best possible way is to know what type of training law enforcement goes through. Can you explain the training differences between Georgia law enforcement agencies?
Well, yes and no. There is a basic mandate course that every police officer or sheriff deputy in Georgia has to take that's required by Post. So every officer in the state takes the same course to be a police officer or deputy sheriff. It's a little bit different for corrections and some of those other things. but everyone has a basic course. Now, a lot of agencies have additions to that. So, for example, the Atlanta Police Department adds to that. DeKalb County adds to that. But there is a core curriculum that every single person has to take in Georgia. It's 408 hours. It can be done in usually about 10 to 12 weeks. There are 28 different academies in the state of Georgia, some run by police departments, some run by technical colleges, some are at four-year universities, some are regional academies. So there's a whole different market out there for people to get trained as law enforcement officers.
Captain Moore, what does it take to become part of the become a deputy with Fulton County Sheriff's Office?
Much to Mr. Harvey's point, it's the same thing. It's an 11-week course that we have at the Fulton County Public Safety Training Center. For about 6 years, I was actually assigned as a training coordinator, and 3 of those years I was the chief training coordinator at the Fulton County Public Safety Training Center. And those weeks, a lot of it, while you do have a basic curriculum, a part of that is also personal development, which really leads into the instructors that are training those folks, because you can mandate a curriculum, but you can't mandate culture. So I think it's very important for the folks that are actually in those training positions to ensure that they are training officers to be next level in the way that they engage. But the training is the same across the board for anyone that is getting a peace officer certification.
And Deputy Chief Spann, bringing it down to Atlanta, what does it entail, and what is the process like?
So the Atlanta Police Department is uniquely different. As you all know, we're the largest in the Southeast. And because we are serving the citizens in the capital city of Georgia, we actually have 902 hours of training, which is actually 26 weeks and 12 weeks on-the-job field training. We make sure that we accomplish, just like Chief Peak alluded to earlier, we make sure we develop that culture, taking our recruits to the Civil Rights Museum. We make sure that they have 8 hours of that, as well as 8 hours of the CIT training, which is the, crisis intervention training. We know that in the Capitol, unfortunately, we deal with a lot of mental health issues. So we want to make sure that our recruits and officers are trained to deal with that accordingly once they hit the streets.
Give us an idea of what the CIT, the Crisis Intervention Training, looks like.
So the crisis intervention training is a week-long course. They learn about different mental illnesses that different people are suffering through, whether it be schizophrenia, dementia, you name it, they go through it. A lot of times they have the ability to speak with different people who may be suffering from that. It's put on by a group, NAMI, also through Gypstick. They actually come to the academy, and every recruit has to go through this in order to graduate from the police academy.
Is that becoming more, just maybe it's because it's more visible these days, it seems, our mental illness situation, and this is a panel, a question for the entire panel. Is that something that maybe we should spend a little bit more time on? I know a week is ample, it probably works, but is it a situation where, I don't know, maybe do we need more training or more understanding about what's happening with our mental ill parts of the population?
So right now, Dave, to be honest with you, it's not a mandate through the state of Georgia. Atlanta Police Department is unique in the sense that that's what we are offering at this time, but there is a lot of on-the-job training, whether you want it to be or not, specifically with everything that we have going on in our great city. These are some of the challenges that we face. No, we are not social workers, but it certainly does help to have that training as you go and address certain issues.
And there are, as part of the governor mandates, there are some de-escalation that's part of that. I think dealing and some mental health awareness. I think there can be more. It certainly is something that people are dealing with, and it's both from an officer safety issue and also from a public safety issue. I mean, if you're dealing with an individual that is going through a mental health crisis, they can be a danger to themselves, they can be a danger to the officer, they can be a danger to other people around them. So it is something that I think is getting a lot more attention and is likely to, and like Deputy Chief said, they've taken the initiative. A lot of other agencies have taken the initiative to do similar kinds of training, and we certainly applaud that.
So just to echo what Deputy Director Harvey and Deputy Chief Spann said, so even with the Sheriff's Office, while it's not a part of our mandated training, once you graduate from the academy, there is an opportunity for folks to be able to go through the CIT training, and there is a lot of on-the-job opportunities to be able to utilize that training. There's also mental health first aid, which is an 8-hour class that allows folks a shortened version, because of course, training when you're out of the field, it takes people out from being able to assist folks. But I think there are always opportunities for us to lean into that space, and we continue to do that on a daily basis.
A couple of more questions for you all in terms of, I understand the training, but looking from the community's perspective, whenever there's a situation that unfortunately becomes questionable, the community always says, or the family members always say, well, you didn't have to do this. Why didn't you do that? He would still be here, or she would still be here if you had done this. I think because they don't understand the training and what you all are doing when you're out there. Unfortunately, you all become the recipients of that mourning and anger. Help us understand, if you can, what the officers are doing in some of those volatile situations and what the training entails.
So a couple of times we look at different scenarios. Actually, every time there is a scenario where we have to, say, use force, for instance, there is a team that will go back, review that incident. We have also the law department, as well as the Citizens Review Board, our internal affairs personnel, and we try to make sure that we are doing what we are supposed to do as it relates to training. So if we do see something that we deem that wasn't done correctly, then of course we're implementing that training, not only for that one officer, but for the department as a whole. I know that a lot of situations, it is always tough to look at a situation and say, what if, and in 2020 hindsight, you know, everybody has that. We'll never be able to get away from that. However, I would encourage different people or citizens, the community, to come to the Citizens Police Academy that we offer. This is something that we put on, I think it's a total of 12 weeks, I believe, and it's a one day out of the week. I think it's 4 hours. Beth, where are you? Help me out. 3 hours for 8 weeks, thank you. 3 hours for 8 weeks, and we have the citizens come in, do different simulators, virtual training as well, to see how they would actually handle those particular issues. But I know there's never a situation where we don't empathize with those families and make sure that we are taking the time to actually have those conversations to explain what the officers can and cannot do.
Captain Moore, you were going to...
Yes, I was, she said part of what I was going to say, but I would also like to add to that. You think about this weekend, Faith and Blue Weekend. This started because Reverend Hutchins had an opportunity to go into Atlanta Police Department, and someone who was kind of like, what are you all doing? This isn't right. And once you actually see the training that folks are going through, you have a better understanding of, well, maybe the way that it was put on the media isn't necessarily the entire story, and it allows people to dig a little bit deeper or ask more questions and have a better understanding and knowing that we don't show up to work with the intent to harm anyone. You know, we want to go home. We want our families to be safe as well, just as much as we want the next person to be safe. And unfortunately, there are instances that result in people losing their lives, but that's never the intent when we walk into any situation. But like I said, that's why we're here today, to break down those barriers, to have those conversations, and invite folks into a space to be able to learn more about what we do. Because we at the Sheriff's Office also have a Citizens Academy. And when people leave out of there, they say, I did not know you all did all this. We didn't know that you all had programs for people in your office to support folks. So I think it's just really about breaking down those barriers and having the conversation to have a better understanding about what we offer and what we can do for the community during those times of need.
And I think when you look at some of the technology that's in use, I mean, there's so many more less lethal options that are available now and that weren't available when I started in law enforcement. And that's not the answer for everything, but it shows that law enforcement, I think, is trying to respond to some of these things. As as Deputy Chief said, you know, Monday morning quarterbacking and 20/20 hindsight is very easy to do. You're talking about men and women who are under tremendously stressful situations in a split second. They don't have the benefit of knowing that this is kind of normal behavior for this person if they're off their medications. So they're responding to somebody that's acting, you know, maybe violently towards them or another person with 20 seconds of knowledge. And sometimes those situations are tragic, but hopefully as training develops and as technology develops, we'll get police officers that are better able to respond in ways that reduce lethality.
Deputy, you know, you're hearing more and more about police or cities or even police departments wanting to put some social workers with police officers to deal with more of those mental health situations, so it doesn't become a volatile situation. And then we're all, you know, second quarter quarterbacking, you know, what happened. Your thoughts on that, and having those social workers there with the police officers or calling them in when there's a situation with someone who may be off their medication or mentally ill?
Yeah, I'm aware the city of Toccoa, just north of Atlanta, has a strong program with that, where they do have somebody who's on staff. Now, it's not like you've got a social worker, you know, riding shotgun in every police car, but they do have them on call, and there have been several situations where they've been able to respond, say, to somebody in a more static situation, like a barricaded situation, where they're able to get in and maybe provide some assistance. Again, it would be wonderful if you know, every police officer could pull out of their toolbox, you know, a surgeon and a psychologist and a wrecker and all this kind of stuff. That's not the reality we live in. And so as a mandate for that everywhere, I just don't think it's practical. But certainly the more inclusive we can be of people with different skills and different skill sets and experiences is going to help law enforcement. Deputy
and Captain, your thoughts on that? Especially, it's one of the biggest counties, in the state, and of course the biggest law enforcement situation at the capital city. Your thoughts on that as well?
I think it's a great idea, but when you think about people being able to come in, funding for something like that, which is always a big issue for a lot of folks. But I definitely think having a social worker, and you think about the mental health aspect of it, you think about a lot of the things that we're dealing with is these other social determinants that really don't have a lot to do with law enforcement, but we are the ones that are kind of stuck in the middle of being able to deal with those situations because they turn violent or something along those lines. But we would certainly welcome it, but what does that look like on a regular basis? And because even if you have a social worker that comes in and the situation gets violent and then they get injured or hurt, then people will start to pull back and say, well, maybe this isn't a great idea. So we just have to find a really good recipe, I suppose, to make that work.
I would agree that a lot of people have implemented the social workers, and I know Downtown Improvement District has one that they employed, as well as Midtown Blue has one that they employ. But at the same time, to the captain's point, I think along with the social worker needs to come the resources. And so what happens when that social worker does respond? Do they have the resources in place to refer them to where they need to be? And so those are all questions that, of course, is bigger than us, but certainly a move in the right direction if we can do it.
Well, I'll get on those county members and those city council members for you guys if you want me to, for that funding. Is there something about training, a question again for all of you, is there something about the training that we go through here in the state of Georgia and the county and the city that you wish people in the community knew or understood?
Well, certainly the training in reference to just really understanding that the Atlanta Police Department does ensure that we are training our recruits on impartial policing and trying to make sure that they are aware of the culture of the city of Atlanta, making sure that they do go to the Civil Rights Museum. A lot of citizens are not aware that we actually take the time to make sure that a lot of recruits that we have, they move here from different cities. And although this is the capital of the civil rights movement, a lot of people don't recognize the different things that Atlanta has gone through. I myself have moved here from Washington, D.C., and the first time I got down here, they sent me to the Apex Museum where I learned a lot about the city of Atlanta, or whatever they did not teach me in school. So I was able to get that knowledge and understanding. So the same thing with the citizens. I truly wish that they knew that the recruits do go to the Civil Rights Museum to understand the culture of Atlanta and where they are and the communities that they are serving.
Two things I would say. One that I'd like people to know is Georgia actually decertifies more police officers than any state in the country. It's just a fact by a wide margin. So that shows that the leadership in Georgia is holding individual officers accountable for bad behavior or for not following standards. The second thing is that hopefully a culture change is happening within law enforcement, and we're moving more towards a guardian model of law enforcement rather than a warrior model of law enforcement. You know, sometimes when different things happen, it becomes an us versus them mentality, and I think that's unfortunate because, you know, there are a lot more of them than there are of us, and two, it really puts law enforcement in a bad position. So if we can continue to make the turn from a warrior, model to a guardian model, where as you're patrolling these neighborhoods and these streets and these businesses, it's primary in the mind of the officers that we're here to help, we're here to serve, we're here to protect the people that are going on. Doesn't mean you don't have to respond appropriately in dangerous situations and to dangerous people, but if you go out with a mindset that I'm a guardian, I think it changes how one does their job every day.
And also, to piggyback off of everything that everyone else has said, when we look at training, our training is continuous, monthly. We have to send officers to training. And of course, we have a lot of officers within our agency. So outside of your basic training, you also have training that you have to do yearly. And our agency often exceeds that minimum requirement that the state mandates. In addition to that, we recently, with the Center for Civil and Human Rights, a repair training looking at policing through a civil rights lens and understanding that communities that you're in may not have, or have historically not had good relationships with law enforcement. So the way that you interact with folks must be looked through a different lens, and recognizing that if folks in a particular community are not as welcoming, it may not necessarily have anything to do with you in particular, but historically this is what it's been, and what can you do? And one thing that I really love about Sheriff Labatt is his focus on community engagement and in putting programs in place to really engage with folks outside of, a one-time event and showing up. It's really about creating opportunities to build relationships, and when those relationships are built, it allows you to be able to break down those barriers and have conversations, and folks feel a little bit more comfortable.
You all have those baseball cards, don't you?
Yes, we do.
I knew I saw them somewhere. A hand for our panelists, please. Mr. Harvey, I think you are actually staying here. And if we can bring back, if we could, Deputy Chief Peak. Nope. My apologies. If we can have the following people come up, please. Rodriguez Seaborn with Credible Messenger Minty. Benjamin Gibbons, Special Agent in Charge, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Laquan Carter, Credible Messenger. And Supervisory Special Resident Agent Dee Alexander, Hartsville-Jackson International Airport. This conversation has to deal with unlikely stories. I think we all have those stories that we've heard where, how did that happen for him? How did that happen for her? Well, maybe it's because they didn't look like me. Maybe they didn't look like him. But most of the times, we're all pretty similar. We all have similar backgrounds, similar stories. How did you get on the news? You don't sound like black people. Most black people I know talk just like me. I come from a single family home. I was on welfare. I love government cheese. But most people see me and they think, you more like Carlton than the Fresh Prince. That's because black people aren't all the same. But sometimes or another, we think they should be. Or the myth is they are all the same. But we are not. The question, oh, look, I'm jumping ahead of myself already. Let's meet this distinguished group right here. Benjamin Gibbons, Special Agent in Charge, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Please share a little bit about yourself, please.
Yes, my name is Ben Gibbons. I'm the Special Agent in Charge of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives here for the Atlanta Field Division, which covers Georgia. I'm a proud graduate of Morris Brown College, and I'm originally from Tucson, or South Tucson, Arizona.
All right. Laquan Carter, Credible Messenger Mentor, Project Safe Neighborhoods.
Yes, sir. My name is Laquan Carter. Originally from Gary, Indiana. Moved to Minnesota. Got the RICO Act and the 18 years in the feds. And relocated down here to give myself a chance. And linked over to Credible Messengers and OAA. And been down here 2 years. Mentor through last year.
Welcome. Supervisory Agent Resident D.D. Alexander, Hartsville-Jackson International Airport.
I'm D.D. Alexander, supervisor at the airport with FBI. Been with the FBI now for 18 years. Started out as a cadet in Montgomery, Alabama with the police department. Then started as a police officer there. So I've been in law enforcement for about 31 years of my life. And I'm glad to be here.
We thank you very much for being here. Coming back up, Pastor, you joining us?
I'm just going to switch microphones here. Use this microphone.
Test.
Speak right up to the microphone so we can hear.
And then D.D. Alexander with Atlanta. Oh, D.D. Alexander. Oh, yeah, I thought so. And your name, sir?
Rodriguez Seaborn. I'm 17 years old with the Incredible Messengers. Let's see. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, born and raised.
Thank you, sir. I was looking for you earlier today. That's why I was a little confused. I'm like, wait a minute. No, that's all right. We welcome you whatever time you get here. That is fine. We're glad you are here, and we're glad you're here to share your story with us. Yeah, give our panelists a hand if you could. So the question for the panel, I've heard that young people feel a disconnect between the church and them, or between law enforcement and them, because they feel they have never been where others are. This next conversation dispels that myth. These folks are here with powerful stories to share, and you might also be surprised. I think we started getting down this road a little bit when we started hearing about your stories. And if you could share, Laquan, your story and its importance to our community?
Like I said, I'm the fourth child out of 6 children. Mother single. So I was born in the 77, so the 80s. My mother was on crack, cocaine. Father went to prison when I was 3 months old, so I met him when I was like 7. So the drugs in Gary and Chicago area was real big in the 80s, so my mom tried to get me out that environment, take me up to Minnesota, but I was already embedded in the gang life, so went up to Minnesota, having children at a young age, in the streets, you know, I take care of myself, my 2 siblings, my 2 younger siblings, and my 2 baby moms at 15. And so from there, just surviving and in the streets every day, you know, doing the best I can to provide for my family and my mind without breaking the law.
What turned you around from that side of the law to the other side of the law?
When the judge gave me 405 months, when that federal judge gave me 405 months, and
it sobered you up.
Yeah.
Sobered you up in the sense that
that's what it did. It sobered me up because, you know, being in that life in the streets, we on drugs. You know, just like I said, when I got into the penitentiary to Coleman 1, USP in Florida, and seeing all the stabbings and the mayhem, and I just was sick and tired of being sick and tired. So, you know, I went to the chapel. I went to the chapel and I heard something, and I just wanted to, you know, do what's right now.
Thank you very much for doing what is right now and making a difference in the community. Rodriguez, share your story if you could.
I'm 17 years old, and right now I'm working on getting my GED because I want to go to the military, and I am going to go to the military. I'm on my second, I'm going to my second appointment October 18th to get my tattoo removed. I'm with Incredible Messengers. I just wanted to make a change because I seen too many of my brothers dying and going to prison, and it really hurted me, and I felt like I was going down the same route as them. So I just started getting into a lot of different programs to make a change. Right now, I'm on my last GED from getting down with my GED. I'm on the last one, and I just want to do something positive because it's like a cycle. Everybody doing the same thing over and over, and I just want to do something different.
Let's give our 2 panelists a hand. Agent Alexander, you hear their stories. You've talked with people like this. What can we do as a community to bring more of those people into law enforcement and to living right, into doing something different with their lives? What can we do?
Basically, like everybody, all the panelists said, we have to have a relationship. Just to hear his story, it brings me back to mine. When I was 15 years old, well, I grew up single parent household. My mom raised me, never knew who my father was. So I used to do a lot of things. I mean, I used to steal my mom's car at night, things of that nature. Me and my mom lived in a little house. And I remember one night after a football game, you know, everybody go out, they go to like a parking lot. Back then in Montgomery, it was the Crystals. So everybody meet up at Crystals and just hang out, talk to girls, things of that nature. My mom had burglar bars on her house. So
I thought that was standard for every house. I did.
So I made it a point to make my room the emergency burglar bar, the emergency window. And whenever it rained, and you know, the rust would get on the burglar bar, so when you let it up, it'll squeak. So I would run across the street to my neighbor's house and get WD-40 so it wouldn't squeak. I was setting everything up, right? So when my mom was in the bed, because like I say, we was in a small house, but when my mom went to sleep, I would go out the emergency door and I'll take her car and I'll go up to the Crystals and hang out. So this one particular night I did that, met up with some of my friends, and we always would have an area. If something broke out, we would go to an area. We already pick out the spot. And I was 16 at the time. And this particular night, I go up there to the Crystals. Me and one of my friends, we were just talking, and all of a sudden we hear gunshots ring out. As soon as I heard the gunshots, I run to the area where we're supposed to meet up. Well, this particular friend didn't make it there. He ended up getting shot and killed. I was standing, we were about this close together. So I couldn't tell my mom. So I got in the car and I came back home. I snuck back in the burglar bar window, put my clothes on, and act like I was asleep. I couldn't sleep. My mom comes in the room. I hear the phone ring, and then I hear my mom say, "My Lord." She come in the room, and she tells me what happened, and she was so glad that I wasn't in that atmosphere. You know, the only thing I could think about was, just imagine if I had to replay it in my head. The doorbell ring is the police officers. Okay, so let's say the police officers come to the door, and my mom goes to the door, and they say, "Is your son D.D. Alexander?" She'll say, "Yes." "Well, we have some bad news for you, ma'am. Your son is dead." "My son ain't dead. My son in his room." And I could hear her, I could just imagine her calling my name. "Dee-Dee.
You're downstairs.
Dee-Dee." And I never come. Now, she goes to the room and I'm not in the room. Now, all of a sudden, reality have kicked in that what these police officers are saying could be correct. It took that situation for me to wake up. Because I hung out with my boys that were selling dope. I never sold it, but I hung out with them. I hung with my friends that was gangbangers. I never was a gangbanger, but I hung out with them. But at that point, I had to make a decision in my life on what direction did I want to go in. Did I want to go left or I want to go right? Deputy Chief Pete said that all of us are born, we're born on the same track. Somewhere in the road, we have curves. We have to decide on what direction we want to go in. And I had to make that decision. We couldn't use the fact that we grew up in a single parent household. We could, but that's just us making that decision. We have to make the decision to change our lives like they have. I'm proud of you, man. I am 100% proud of you. But, then I decided to become a police cadet. You could do that. Back in the day, you could do it. I don't know if you could do it now. To learn how police officers, did things, and that was a way of you going through the process and deciding when you turn 21 if you want to be a police officer. And I met some very, very positive police officers when I was in that program. And I decided to make a change. I decided to become a police officer, and it led to me becoming an FBI agent. And I tell everybody, if you decide to go down that road, it's because you decided to go down that road. Nobody else. You have to make the decision to do it on your own. And that's what I had to do. So, that's my story.
Great story. Thank you. Special Agent Alexander, Supervisor Alexander, and that Chief Peak, he's kind of a smart man, isn't he?
He is. I always laugh because he kind of raised me at the police department. I mean, not police department, but at the airport. So, yeah.
Special Agent in Charge, Benjamin Gibbons. Please share your story, if you could, please.
Wow. A lot of these stories are similar to mine. So everybody has an origin story, right? Where we start from. And mine started in South Tucson. And it's just like it was the 80s, the 90s, all the gangs that moved from California moved, of course, to Arizona and Nevada. So I grew up in gang culture with the Hispanic gangs, Bloods and Crips, and various other sets. But, I think one of the most important things for people to have is, one, opportunity. And when coming from those environments, I think it's not a lot for somebody just to go out their way and say, hey, I see something in you. Can I steer this person this way? So my story started out, if anybody see the movie Colors, at the beginning, first day of high school, that's how it was. But it was like that in middle school, but all various sets. All my friends, gang members, I have all my friends from back home that are still alive or not in prison, have been shot, sold or moved drugs. But that wasn't what I foresaw for myself. But one thing I want to bring up that's important about having a father in the home, and everybody's like, okay, I didn't grow up in a single family home. I had a father in the home. But my father's story was that of somebody who had been through the penal system, all right, who, a blessing that he didn't go away for a long time, but he got to just whisper words to me, hey, I see you rolling with this person, that, but make sure when it comes time to do the right thing, you do the right thing. And just conversations like that kept me away from being involved in activities, the gang activities. Also, I didn't want to disappoint my mother. She was strict. She's from Oakland. I spent a lot of summers in Oakland, California. And I never wanted to disappoint her. But opportunities, I'm here to say is when others see opportunities for you and see that you are someone who's trying to do something right, sometimes those doors will open. They will open for you. And they started in church. Had a family friend in church, saw opportunity that I wasn't out there running the streets like others. And I want to say my junior year in high school, we wound up taking a trip here to Atlanta to be at a biomedical symposium that was for minorities from around the nation. And I actually got to see Atlanta. For me to come to Atlanta and see black men with suits, driving nice cars that were not drug dealers and involved in the game, it blew my mind. Outside of church, I'm sorry. Outside of church. I never saw that. Most, like I said, they were out there doing the dirt. So that prompted me to say, man, I think I can get out. I see success. I see what success looks like outside of my community. And having that opportunity, I looked at all the colleges here. And a quick story, I told my high school counselor, Mr. DiBiase, who's actually the brother of Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man. But he said, I walked in, I said, hey, I need to look at that computer, see, I need to start applying for some colleges in Atlanta. And he looked at me like, colleges? Because my school was all about trades and crafts. It was auto mechanic, it was construction. They didn't necessarily put that out there that you can go to college, especially for me. And I had a good school resource officer, Officer Walker, so who I was always encouraged by, like, man, I think I want to go into law enforcement. And when he wasn't chasing my friends on the weekend or busting them, I would always just pick his brain about stuff. So I think there's things that are important for especially young black men, young black women, but having that person that recognizes and sees something in you to steer you the right way. Two, even if you make mistakes, to let you know that, hey, everybody makes mistakes, but you can overcome that. It may take time, but you can overcome that. And definitely congrats for you completing, preparing to complete your GED. I think that's important, and that's just the first step. You'll go on to go to the military, to go get an education further, and do great things. Coming back home, I just had a friend that just came back from the feds. Did some time in the feds and just came back home, but they see the picture, you know. So it's opportunity and having somebody that believes in you, but you first got to believe in yourself, because as we all know, all those we run with when we were younger and stuff, hey, not everybody makes it, and you can only tote what you did in life, and so your mistakes or your successes are going to be based on the work that you put in.
Agents Alexander and Gibbons, and I'll start with you, Agent Alexander. Words of encouragement for Rodriguez and even Laquan, just to encourage them. And Pastor, if I can have you come up as well to round it out as well. But starting with you, Agent Alexander, what would you say to Rodriguez or someone like Rodriguez that hasn't decided on which path they're going to go on that split in the road? What would you say to them?
First off, you know, make sure you choose your friends wisely. You know, I had to cut a lot of friends off, and you know, but for the betterment for me. And you know, now they understand. They understand why I cut them off, and now, you know, now you're going to be a leader, and you're going to be able to go back and teach your friends, because when they see you succeed, it's going to be a positive for them, and they're going to want to follow your footsteps. So at this point, you can start considering yourself as a leader, because you're going to have people that's going to want to know your story, and just keep doing what you're doing right now. It sounds like you're doing, you know, you're on a positive road. You're doing what you need to do. I can't wait to see, I mean, what success you're going to be in the future. I'm going to keep up with you. But yeah, but that's the main thing. Just keep doing what you're doing, stay positive, and just choose your friends wisely.
Special Agent Gibbons?
Yes, I would echo the same thing. Preparation is everything. Even when that door, you see doors that are closed, when the door opens and you're not prepared, then you may not get that call, right? But if you are prepared, then they're going to usher you right on in, because they're going to see something in you. That's why I say continue to work. You're not going to stop at your GED. You know, you're going to go to the military, be successful. If you decide to take on even higher education, whatever field you choose, always study and start preparing for what you want to do. Friends, some friends will come with you. I mean, I can tell you right now, I have 2 friends from back home, and we talk probably 3-4 times a year. They're still my friends, but we're different places. I haven't forgot about them. And then there's going to be some that are going to doubt you on what you're doing, because they want you at the same place where they're at, because they're not trying to proceed with their life and do things similar to you. Ignore them, and change is good. Take a chance on yourself, believe in yourself, and welcome home, man. I think that's great, excellent work, stories like that. And conversely, that's also what helped me out too, was, as we used to say back home, old Vicks, old convicts, that would be like, nah, young man, don't you get in that car. You know what I'm saying? Because you're going to end up doing a drive-by with these clowns. You know, those things are important. People in the community are important. Everybody has a place to park. So I'd say, keep striving, keep working. I appreciate that.
Pastor, before you round us out, Laquan, if you can give us a little bit more information about Credible Messenger for folks who may not be familiar with it, people watching as well, because it sounds like it's an integral part of doing the right thing for our community.
So Credible Messenger is multifaceted parts of it. I'm with the Trouble Youth, but also they help guys coming home. They help guys transition to, you know, places, apartments, help with transportation, but they really do like self-development. And getting the youngsters or the people coming home, a plan. What's your plan coming out? And so, that helped me out tremendously in me having a plan, but also helping out the youngsters, giving back. So, we just, finished training yesterday and just learned a lot about mentoring. I did it in prison, but, coming out here to society, it's all different breed. And just so happened, I went to prison at 25, but I really have a young mindset, so I can relate to the youngsters. And all I wanted was to somebody listen to me, somebody to acknowledge me.
If people wanted more information about the program, to join the program, get their child enrolled in the program, what's the best way to get that information out?
We're at the Promise Center. I don't know if we have a website.
But contact the Promise Center, and that information about the program is right there.
Yes, like I say, it's powerful. We do great work, and these young men, they really want to be in the street, but they got the peer pressure, they got the law enforcement, so they kind of lost. So help them find a game plan and take it day at a time.
Working with law enforcement, but also working with the community and the faith-based community. Pastor, your words of encouragement and staying on the straight and narrow.
Well, I think the first thing I want to say is I want to express my gratitude to all of the panelists. I've already been in church today. I came in at 11 o'clock. We had worship. But this was like going to church because each of you is a sermon to me. Your success, your challenges, your choices are an inspiration. And so I want you to know how much power you already have because you are making choices that will serve us all really well. I'm really moved by what I've heard today. So the first thing I want to do is say how we can help you. You just need to let me know because you are on the front line that I might not even be aware of, but maybe we can help. Maybe there's a place for the church to help you that do what you do in ways that we couldn't necessarily do, but with your help, with our partnership, we can do it. I just want to encourage you to say, keep going. That's the first thing. The second thing is I want you to be prepared for disappointment. Because, when you get on the right path, that doesn't mean that stuff doesn't still go left. But you got to keep going the way you've been called to go. So remember that failure is a part of success. I don't know anybody that's been successful that hadn't had some rocks in the road. But you just got to keep going and don't look back. And the other thing I would say is that, in a sense, you already are a success story because you're taking your second chance, your third chance, your fourth chance, just keeping the chance open, the opportunity open, and there will be people to help you get to where you need to be. I've been inspired because I think the churches in this very difficult time are trying to find a way to be more relevant and more in contact with all of the many challenges, and you all have given us some good lessons today. So I want to say that you really encouraged us, and I just want you to know that we got your back as well. And to you gentlemen who are a little bit ahead of them generationally, you all are so impressive. I mean, you all are success stories, and we need to be reminded of what's possible. And so I just think it's been a great day. I think this is exactly what we should be doing, being in conversation, figuring out new ways to work together for the greater good, and just to let everyone know that we're there for you, and we hope that you will be there for us. I'm very encouraged by that. So that's what I would add for today, because I think it's been a great day.
Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. Andrews. Let's give our panelists a hand. We can all help one another. We can all work together. We just have to get out of our way and do the work. Do the work. Like Pastor said, it's not always easy, but doing it is what's so important on building those bridges between faith, civic organizations, and the community, and of course, law enforcement. We thank you very much for participating and watching our panel today, and we hope you have a wonderful day. And keep in mind what has been said here today. Do the work. I'm Dave Huddleston from WSB TV. Thank you for joining us.